Hi, everyone. My name is Egidio Smith. I'm with Life Wellness Azores, and I'm here today to give you an overview, as best I can in 1 hour, plus or minus, of the Azores Portugal Workshop. So this was a workshop that we ran just over a week ago, and it was focused on the Triangle Islands of São Jorge, Pico, and Faial. And we covered a number of topics that would be of interest for anyone looking to move or is considering Portugal, and more specifically the Azores, and even more specifically the Triangle Islands of Pico, Faial, and São Jorge. From a real estate perspective, for retirement, for residency, and also if you're considering to work remotely. So we had participants from Germany, from Austria, and from the United States. A whole, a breadth of backgrounds and interests, and we did provided a quite intensive and in-depth workshop with a number of professionals and presenters and real estate experts, and even individuals who did construction and renovation. So we'll get into all of that. But before we do, we kind of just step back a bit and provide an overview of how all this came about. And if you wanted to get a sense of how this all unrolled, more than just than this recap session, you should have a look at the video that Carlos and Laura put out. Carlos and Laura have a YouTube channel called Our Journey on Pico Island, and we did this workshop as a collaboration between Life Wellness Azores and Carlos and Laura and their channel on YouTube, Our Journey on Pico Island. And so they actually put out a video recently, part one of a behind the scenes look at the actual workshop. So you'll get a really good feeling and feel of some of the things that we did as part of the workshop. And so, as I said, they have a channel on YouTube. It's called Our Journey on Pico Island, and they have about 7,600 subscribers, so a nice number of subscribers and followers. And that's actually where this idea kind of came about, from some of the comments that they were getting from their subscribers. Met back in 2022, and so both Celeste and I, my wife, were here, and we met through the channel. And we actually had we put out a couple of videos, 4 of them actually, that covered our visits together on São Jorge, Pico, and Faial as part of a triangle tour that we were putting together. So we put out the 4 videos, 2 on São Jorge, 1 on Pico, and 1 on Faial. So if you're interested in some more background, you can have a look at that. But just kind of setting the stage and some background on Life Wellness as well. So, this all came about 5 years ago, when I needed to take a little bit more of attention and take care of my health. And so more focus on life, on health and wellness, and then also an interest in the Azores and understanding how wellness tourism had a role here in the Azores. And as I did more research and visited the Azores numerous times to really get a feel for what the opportunity was, the conclusion was there was something here and I needed to explore it further. And that's where Life Wellness came about. And so right now we have a network of partners that include accommodations, just under, no, actually maybe just a little over 30 partners. We'll be updating our website to get them all on there. So we have a variety of accommodations, from bed and breakfast to accommodation, to organic farms, to rustic homes, to yurts, to 4- and 5-star hotels. So a good array of accommodations to choose from. We also have put some packages together that are, for example, the best of Portugal and the best of the Azores. I'll speak to that in a little bit later on the next slide. And then we also have some experiences. So we've, as part of over the years, come across some partners that we think are really the top people to work with and to use when you're here doing excursions, or going to the top of Fico Mountain, or going canyoning, or ocean kayaking, or whale watching. And so over the next couple of weeks and months and years, we'll be putting out some more videos on some of these partners, showcasing them and the great services that they offer. Specifically, we're also putting some workshops and retreats together in packages that will take people across continental Portugal and the Azores and really showcase all that the Azores have to offer. And so we've got detailed itineraries. We're not looking to do mass groups. We're looking to do small groups, either private groups, and they can be done on their own, but everything is taken care of as far as reservations and accompaniment, so you don't have to worry about everything. Or we'll also do, on occasion, a couple of times a year, will accompany some of the groups as well. So look for both of those. So you can do it yourself as a self-guided package or tour, or take one of the guided packages that we offer. Here we have some pictures of some of the ones that we've done. The picture with the group there was actually our first Best of Portugal tour that we did in May of last year. And it was such a success, and the feedback was so great. We said, yeah, we definitely have to do more of this. People really liked the fact that we were focusing on a low and slow. You may have seen some videos we're putting out on low and slow. So go low season, and slow pace of travel. So you really get a chance to enjoy. It's not up at breakfast at 7, on the bus at 7:30, and on to the next place. It's a little bit more relaxed. If you are an early bird and like to do more things before you get started, or other people get started in the morning, or after you get back to the hotel, you still have some energy, we offer optional walks in the morning or in the evening, depending on the location and the things that there are to see and do. So we're not pushing everyone through things, but for those people that want to do a little bit more and have that energy and interest, we do offer some optional things that they can do as well as part of these packages. And obviously, if you're doing a self-guided or do-it-yourself plan, of course, you have all that flexibility yourself. So this all came about as a result of an email I sent Carlos back in February 2022. That led to the discussion and visit to the Azores around the Triangle Islands package that we've put together. And then in August of 22, Life Wellness registered as a tour operator, so that we could offer packages in the Azores and in continental Portugal. And so from the feedback and discussions that we had, and looking at the comments that were coming in from the followers on their channel, it was clear that a workshop that brought together all of the experts, that provided the information all in one central place, that you could ask your questions, start building your contacts, your network, and meet some of the locals and really get a lot of learnings that needed to be done, that wasn't being offered anywhere. So we decided to do it, and it has turned out to be quite successful. So just a bit of an overview. This is kind of the agenda at a glance, as I call it. And so what you see here is day-by-day overview of what we did. And so the sessions that are in the dark blue, those are the in classroom, in session, seminar type of presentations where experts came in, and ourselves as well. Both Carlos and Laura and myself had sections or modules that we did as far as our presentations as part of this workshop as well. But then we brought in individuals. For example, on the second day there in the afternoon, we had a lawyer come in. She was available in the afternoon that day, and did her presentation. I'll touch on some of the points that she went through. And then we had a real estate expert come in and do their overview of each of the islands. So one real estate expert from each individual island of São Jorge, Pico, and Faial. They came in, spoke about their island, things to look out for if you're looking to buy something that's a ruin and renovating it, starting fresh with a vacant piece of land, or taking something that is almost turnkey, and some of the things to watch out for, considerations when you're doing that. And then what we would do is in the afternoon, things that are green are basically field excursions, actually going out and visiting the different towns, the different islands, the different things, not necessarily just from a tourism perspective and look at this great view, but also to getting a feel. That was probably one of the number one objectives of the workshop. Right behind making contacts and building your network was getting a feel for the island. That was absolutely one of the goals that we had put out there. It's something that's hard to do and communicate in a video. You have to come and experience it. And so that's what this opportunity did. Certainly, if you're not able, or we had individuals that wanted to come for various personal reasons, they couldn't come. So we are going to make a digital version of the workshop available. And so all of the presentations were recorded, including the question and answer sessions. We're going to have some videos on the excursions that were done as well as part of the digital version. You'll have the PDFs of all of the slides. So all of that would still make it a very complete package. So if you are interested, drop us a note at egidio@lifewellnessazores.com, or through Carlos and Laura on their channel, or at our picoholidayexperts.com site as well. So basically there we've laid it out. all of the meals and accommodations were totally taken care of, as well as transportation. And if you want more on that to see what that was like, have a look at the videos, because we'll see some of the buses and minivans that we used when we were doing these the field excursions. We've also indicated the places that we ate, which we must say, I think everyone enjoyed the quality, the high quality of the food that we're able to provide our guests, whether it was at the hotels where we were staying or out and about, and at special places like the Magna restaurant and the Font Tavern as another example, and then Mercado Bayo. We had some participants who preferred vegetarian or vegans, who were trying to accommodate that, and I think we did a good job in that as well. So getting into the summary, because I've only got about an hour to go through this, so and over 130 slides. So I'm going to try and make it through all of it. Of course, I am not going to cover 10 days of materials in an hour and go through every slide and every point, but I am going to give you, and what I promised was a recap of the workshop, so you really get a feel for what the workshop involved and entailed. And so we started with an overview of the Azores and Portugal as well. So one of the things that we had said is we're going to, yes, speak to the Triangle Islands, but first we're also going to give people that might be interested in continental Portugal or perhaps another island. We had some individuals attend who were interested in San Miguel as a place to buy a home. But to be honest, I think after they saw some of the other islands, the 3 islands that we visited in particular, they might have second thought and might want to revisit, or at least spend some more time thinking about whether San Miguel is going to be the island they're going to be. Maybe it still turns out to be, but I certainly think it gave them some additional food for thought when they were looking at their different options. And so the way we started off is we started at the very top. And so setting the stage was Carlos and Laura, as far as their journey on Pico Island, Celeste and I, and how we kind of met them and kind of came together. And for as an overview, which I've already gone through, I do it in a lot more detail, not a lot more, but more detail during the actual presentation. And then what we did was an overview of the Azores, Portugal, and Madeira. So people got a taste and flavor for the things that you should know about the different islands, the different regions of Portugal as well. And a lot of it was more of a pictorial and speaking to some of the pictures and highlights from each of the different areas. And then, as well as part of the day one, and some of the topics that I covered was the people and the culture and the religion, which is very important in Portugal and in the Azores. And as well, we had a short section on the political system as a result of a request from one of the participants. Before participants arrived, we asked for them to send some comments as far as the things that they would like to make sure are covered off. And this was one of the questions. We didn't necessarily want to bring in an expert to deal with that, so I put some information together and covered that as part of the original presentation. So I think what we're going to do is just get right into it. And so we started with an overview of Portugal and its 7 regions. And so here you have them listed. We'll go through them individually, so I won't rhyme them off now. At number 6, of course, the Azores Islands. At the bottom is where we were going to spend the most time, and actually where we started when we went through that list, because that was the focus of the individuals coming in. And so, but before we got into a pictorial journey through the Azores and Portugal and Madeira, we thought it would be important to provide an overview as far as the history of Portugal. This wasn't a history lesson. It wasn't a history class. We didn't, go into a great number, detailed years and months and kings and all of that. But we provided enough of an overview that someone wanting to come and live in Portugal should know. And so part of the residency process or citizenship process, the government wants to see that you've taken an interest in taking courses to help you understand Portugal and their culture and their history. And so allow us to provide a certificate and allow us to say, yes, we did cover some of this in the workshop. We've included a section on that as well. And so you can see here that, we tried to provide a bit of a timeline and history as far as how Portugal came to be and the significant influence that Portugal had from the Moors and the Spanish. It's huge influence as well. And so we tried to capture some of that. There was also, I've noted here on one of the bullets, the German Visigoths. That was a Germanic tribe of noblemen that came into Portugal and were here for about 700 years and had a significant influence. And then in the early 700s, that's when the Moors came in and pushed them out, and then they went through some battles with Spain back and forth as far as who's going to run the country. And so again, we're not going to go through each of these bullets, but we provided an overview as far as how Portugal got to be a state, and it all started with the creation of the country. Here, there's a place in Guimarães, a tower, and it's the customs department tower that says, aqui nasceu Portugal. Portugal was born here, and that was where there was a battle that was won by King of Portugal, King Afonso of Portugal, the first of Portugal, also known as Afonso Henriques, who actually battled against his mother and won that battle and declared the state of Portugal, and it grows from there. In the 12th century, that wasn't creating Portugal that we know today. That was a section of Portugal, the northern part. And then the southern part was conquered or taken back from the Moors with the help of the Knights Templar. So if you're a fan of history and all that goes with the Knights Templar, you'll certainly want to dig into Portuguese history a little bit more. And then, of course, the southern Portugal was reconquered or reconquested in the mid 1200s as well. We went into some discussion about how Portugal, and in the age of the discoveries, the Portuguese navigators basically could do no wrong. They were exploring the world. That was the high tech, the latest and leading edge technology that they had as far as navigation, and they were exploring new worlds and bringing back the riches, which those riches from the trades of spices and that they brought back from Africa and Asia are what led to the riches that still exist today in continental Portugal, as far as some of the monuments and cathedrals or monasteries that have been created and castles that have been created. And so that's how they all came to be. And then this is more of a pictorial as far as the conquest and colonialization in the age of discoveries. France and Spain, as I mentioned, Spain earlier, had a significant influence in the history of Portugal, and more significantly as well, perhaps England. England has always been a strong ally of Portugal and still is to this day. And then we even speak to the creation of the Republic, where the king was exiled, fled into exile to England, and that created the revolution of a republic and creation of governments, and that in itself went through some turmoil. And then dictators as well up into the early 70s, and that actually turned around with the revolution, the Carnation Revolution in 1974. And then we dug down into the Azores. And so this is where we start kind of an overview of the Azores and continental Portugal as well. And so we speak about how the Azores were discovered, starting with the first island, which was named Santa Maria. As we'll see later, religion and Catholicism and Christianity play a big role in the Portuguese culture. And so it would be befitting that the first island, the Azores, be named after the mother of Jesus, Mary. And then along came San Miguel, another saint, Saint Michael. And then, of course, the third island, we were very creative with names. We went to Terceira. And Terceira, the literal translation for Terceira in English is third. So it was the third island to be created, and has that designation of Terceira. And then along, because it's in the central group, from Terceira, you could easily see Graciosa, São Jorge, and in the background behind São Jorge, Pico, the high Pico mountain, the tallest point in Portugal, and alongside it, Faial. And then there was a bit of a quiet period for a couple of decades, and then they thought that was it. That was the end of the Azores. They had the 7 islands, but little did they know there was actually 2 more to be discovered. That was Flores and Corvo. And Flores, as you can see on the map, is actually the most western point of Europe, not continental Europe, that is in continental Portugal, but as far as Europe itself, the most western point of Europe is on Flores Island. And then what we did is provided a little bit of an overview just to set the stage as far as population, as far as the different islands, depending on people want a little bit more active commercial activities, go to some of the larger islands, whether it is landmass or population or commercial activity. And then also one of the other metrics there that we have is altitude. Pico is the tallest point in Portugal, as I said, and it's the tallest point in the Azores. Pico Mountain is 2351 meters, so just over 2.3 kilometers high. And each of the shaded areas that you have in each of the criteria are designate the top three as far as population, landmass, size, as far as area, and the highest points as well on the island. And then from a visual perspective here, you can see that from a population, San Miguel and Terceira make up just over 3/4 of the population, and then the other islands follow along in suit. So the next three being Fayal, Pico, and São Jorge. And those are the islands that we focused here as part of the workshop. So kind of the middle group, not the large commercial islands, but the ones just next to it. And then, of course, we have the smaller islands, including Cor, Flores, and Graciosa, and Santa Maria as well as the number 4. From a landmass perspective, kilometers, we had Terceira and Pico. Actually, Pico is number 2 as far as size, making up a bit more than half. Add in Terceira, that brings us up to about 2/3 of the square kilometers in the Azores are made up of those 3 islands. And just to put all the different islands into perspective. And then what we did is we did a pictorial walkthrough that highlights some of the things that people should know about or might be interested in when they're looking at the different islands, in case one of them attracts their attention. Maybe they want to go. We had one individual who came to this workshop, visited the 3, had been to San Miguel before, and went on to Terceira to visit Terceira, and then went on to Madeira to experience that, and then also on to Porto, and they'd been to Lisbon as well. So really getting a flavor for the different parts of Portugal. And I think that's an important key. If you're making a very, life changing decision as far as where you're going to stay, living there and getting to the feel of it. We talk again about getting the feel of it is very important. Going there and feeling it and experience it is key. So Santa Maria, I'm not going to go through the detailed discussion on each of the islands, but that is one of the islands, for example, that has a large sand beach and has a great blues festival, jazz festival in the summer. Certainly one of the biggest in the Azores. But as far as sandy beaches, if that's on your must-have list, well, they're not on all the islands. You have it on Santa Maria, you have it on Graciosa, Fayal, and San Miguel, maybe Terceira, but more so it's dark sand, volcanic sand, and as well more of the natural pools that are formed by lava formation. So beautiful pools, but they're not the sandy beaches that you'd find in the Mediterranean. Santa Maria was actually quite surprising. It was the last island that Celeste and I visited, but really, really enjoyed it. I see it as a mixture of Graciosa, São Jorge, and Madeira, all wrapped up in one. Small like Graciosa, nice and cute. Greenery and vegetation, lush nature like São Jorge and Flores. And Madeira, a lot of winding roads in and out of ribeiras, the creeks. And so a little bit of all of that coming together, but at a small price point, not price point, but footprint, small size. And then, of course, one of the formations, they have a geological formation, and maybe this picture doesn't do it justice, but when I saw this formation in this red rock that just juts out of the ground, completely unusual for an island in the Azores to have this type of geological formation. Well, I was quite impressed by it. Then we moved on to San Miguel. This is probably the most famous picture that people see when they're looking at the Azores. It's the Sete Cidades, the 2 lakes, the Green Lake and the Blue Lake, and an iconic site here on San Miguel. And then the biggest, San Miguel also has the largest commercial center. It's here in San Miguel where we are today. I forgot to mention, we're actually at the Vila Galé, a collection hotel, one of the larger hotel chains in Portugal. It's a beautiful hotel that just opened 2 days ago. And we're actually one of the first guests to be here. And this was formerly a convent, a school, a hospital, and now a very, very nice hotel. And I'll certainly be doing a post so you can see some of the facilities here. Even walking along these corridors is. When you come to San Miguel, one of the important things to note is it's like stepping back in time. You're going back 300-400 years, 500 years even, and it's like old European architecture. It's really cobblestone streets, They've got stones that have are kind of artistic sidewalks where people have artists. You could say they're artists because it's an art to be able to make those designs on the sidewalks with the black and white rocks that they use. Just amazing. And of course, almost like in Porto as well, San Miguel and specifically Ponta Delgada have a completely different feel at night in the day. Walking around in the day, you'll enjoy it, see a lot of things, but then you do that walk at night when things are a little calmer and things are cooler and the bright lights, and it's just very special walking around Ponta Delgada. And then, of course, the third island, Terceira, it is also one of the larger islands, number 2 on the list. And it also has a city, a couple of cities actually. It has Angra do Heroísmo and Praia da Vitória. And here we have Angra do Heroísmo. It's a beautiful historic center as well. I love going to Angra. It really feels like you're stepping back in time as far as European history. And then Graciosa was next on the list. Graciosa is one of the smaller islands, but as looking at this picture, you wouldn't know it. This is a Villa de Santa Cruz. Looking at this, you know, yeah, that's a fair size. But this is probably the largest town in Graciosa. So total population is under 2,500 people. So there's not a lot of people, not a lot of activity, but beautiful for hiking, quiet, just to get away. They also have one of the top things to know that some people don't know about Graciosa is beautiful coral reef diving along the coast. And so a lot of people come to Graciosa to do that. So not too well known, but I've heard that you've got some amazing coral reefs to explore on underwater scuba diving. And then there's Saint Georges, which is the island that I'm from. And as you can see from this picture, it's an island that has, unlike some of the other islands, it's got high elevation. So a lot of the towns and villages are on the higher level plateau. And then Saint Georges is also known for the Fajange. What is the Fajan? A Fajan is a coastal plain like we see here in the picture where there's a piece of land at sea level at the bottom, whereas the rest of the island, as you can see from the coastline here, is very much elevated. You have small villages and outcrops of land, coastal plains, where where there are, the land is more fertile, there's a microclimate, and a little bit better weather in winter. And one thing I didn't mention, I'll just go back to this, Saint George is known as the Dragon Island. And one of the reasons is, one, it's named after St. George that slayed the dragon. Okay, makes sense. The other thing is if you bring your artistic sense into it and you can look at this picture and see that it almost looks like a dragon, kind of just the top back, half of it being submerged and the other half visible. And the tip here of Rosage being the head of the dragon, and in the back, there's actually an artistic representation of this that was done by Peter Adrians. That is a painting that kind of represents Saint George, this actual image, but more making it look like a dragon is coming out of the water here. It's quite impressive. And then those coastal plains, this is an example of one, probably one of the most, second to the Sete Cidades picture that we saw earlier. This Feijão da Caldeira de Santo Cristo is actually a caldeira is a crater. And so but it's a crater at sea level. Typically, you'll see craters here in the Azores that are up high and there's got cones, a sphere. But this is at sea level, and so there's a lagoon here. And it's actually the only place in the Azores where you can find some clams. But there are only certain times of the year where you can harvest those clams. I'm going to go through it more quickly. This was actually on a retreat that we did here on Saint George. And this just to give you an impression of kind of the lush and pure nature that we have here in the Azores. I actually walked this hike. This is an unofficial hike. It's not marked. And it was 13 kilometers, just over 13 kilometers, and took us about 5 hours. It was amazing. And there is a guided walk down to the Caldeira. It's a little bit further to the right here along the valley down, but just amazing hikes on all of the islands, not just Saint George. And then, of course, we have to speak to Fayal. Fayal, one of the top things about Fayal is that it was the last active volcano in the Azores. And it was quite active for a long period of time, actually, from September, October of 1957 to September, October of 1958. So about a year. And it started out offshore. a volcano. It started erupting, and along the coast, but offshore. And then there was so much ash that was spewed over the year that it actually conjoined the main island of Fayal and this volcano that was spewing out ashes. And there's an actual image here of this is an overview, an aerial view of Horta, and actually in the middle in the bay there is Porto Ping, where you see the beaches. This is the picture I wanted to get to, which is the volcanic ash. So all of this is volcanic ash, and you can walk around and explore. And there's actually hiking paths that come to and through this area. One thing that's very nice to explore, especially on a rainy day, is there's an interpretation center just before you get to the abandoned lighthouse, which you can actually go up to the top and get the view from there. There's a huge underground interpretation center, and it's quite impressive as far as what they've put in there, basically to showcase what happened here in the Azores during the last eruption. So you see the lava coming out and the ashes being spewed out as well in film and audio. This is Horta with a closer view of the beach there on the right in Port Ping. Then we moved on to Pico, and of course, a couple of the key areas in Pico. There are three main cities, not cities, village. So there's the Vila da Madalena. It's looking to get upgraded as far as status, but it's still a villa. There's Vila das Lajes and Vila de São Roque. And so those are the key areas. This is a picture from Lajes, where actually Carlos and Laura are staying at a family residence while they're renovating their own property in São Mateus, which you'll see on their channel and in the video that they put out even for the workshop, because the group had a chance to visit it. This is a picture of Madalena, the main harbor, looking onto the Church of Madalena, which the patron saint, of course, is Our Lady of Magdalene. And very picturesque and beautiful town on the island of Pico. Near Madalena, we have the Criação Velha, where you find all of the vineyards in the Legido area, which is, on the northern side, and Criação Velha is the west and southern side of the island. A lot of vineyards. That's becoming a greater and greater sense of pride and production that they have here on the island of Pico. With respect to the wine production, they even have a wine museum and taste testings, and numerous companies that have been created to capitalize, to use, to export wine manufactured in the area. And then, of course, that brings us to Flores as the second last island to be discovered. I compare São Jorge to Flores. Flores is also very lush nature, green, pure, raw, great hiking. You see these beautiful waterfalls here. It's just and to get these waterfalls, you kind of walk for about a kilometer through a path, and then this kind of opens up. It's quite. I don't even think this picture does it justice. Another, I mentioned the great hiking. We actually hiked, my wife and I, from the top of where you see here on the right, this cliff, and couldn't believe that there would actually be a path to come down the side of this cliff, but there is. And there was actually people climbing up, and I couldn't believe they were doing that. We decided to take the easy way, and it was still a 3-hour hike, but parked our car at the bottom, got a taxi to bring us up to the starting point, and then we walked all the way down, as opposed to doing the walk in reverse, which was much, much harder. And I could see the people making their way up this cliff, this monstrous cliff, was they were tired. What's interesting is at the end of coming down the cliff, we actually ended up at the base of that waterfall, which has a beautiful natural pool, and it was a great place to kind of just unwind and take a swim and refresh as the water's all tumbling down. It's just very spectacular experience. This is on Flores, and just to showcase that there isn't a lot of flat land in the Azores, and so they have to take advantage of that land wherever they can get it and use it for an airport as well. So here you see that the main city of Santa Cruz das Flores is basically from one end of the runway to the other end of the runway. There's a little bit more on the other side, but the main commercial part is on the north side of that runway. And then you see in the background there the Corvo Island, which is the smallest island in the Azores. And the town there that you see in the center of the picture, that's it. There's less than 500 people on the island. There's that one town and one road to the Caldeira, the crater. and that's it. So if you're really looking to get away and isolate yourself, Cordoba is certainly an opportunity. There's the airport, which basically goes from one side of the island to almost the other side of the island. And the main village, when you see this main village, you say, oh, that looks pretty big. But that's it. This is about the size of and the extent of the town in Porto. We also touched on Madeira. Not going to show as many slides on Madeira in the recap, but Madeira, I call it the Swiss cheese island, in the sense that there's very different from the Azores. So if you're thinking that Madeira is going to be like the Azores, no, it is not like the Azores. And even within the Azores, each island is different. They're special. They're not all the same. And if you have the time and interest, you should explore them to see which one is a fit for you and of more interest, where you kind of get in touch with the energy that each of the island provides. Back to Madeira. Funchal is the biggest city, and here you have a big metropolitan kind of center with a lot of cruise ships coming in. And then at night, also a completely different perspective. This is from up above looking down on Funchal. There's actually a couple of golf courses. I actually initially thought that there couldn't be any golf courses on Madeira, uh, because all of the land is just slopes everywhere. So you wouldn't think you could have many golf courses on the island, because there's a lot of hills. A lot of great hiking on Madeira as well. We actually hiked this one, and we ended up having a picnic, a kind of backpack picnic that we had with some wine and some sandwiches along this pathway just in the background there. Quite spectacular, kind of overlooking clouds. The clouds were below us at the time. Very spectacular. And I mentioned the Swiss cheese. Thank goodness for the tunnels. There's almost 80 tunnels on the island. And if it wasn't for those tunnels, you'd be spending your days driving in and out of the ribeiras, of the creeks. But with the tunnels, you can at least get from one part to another in reasonably straight line. So thank goodness for those tunnels. Now we went on to, after having covered the Azores and Madeira, we went on to continental Portugal. And I'm going to cover that briefly because, as I said, there's quite a few slides and we still have a few to get through. So I'm going to go through this part rather quickly. Northern Portugal, of course, the beautiful city of Porto, completely different view in the morning, during the day, and at night. You have to experience both to really understand it. Along the Douro River, which runs through Porto and Vila Nova de Gaia on the south side, is the Douro River. And along there is probably where you have one of the highest producing wine regions in Portugal, where the Porto wine comes from and is aged in many of them. The lodges are in Vila Nova de Gaia, across the river from Porto. But I think a drive along the Douro and visiting some of the quintas that they have along the Douro are very much worthwhile. We actually include this as a day trip as part of our Best of Portugal tour. Very highly recommended. Even further north, if you have more time, is the National Park of Gerês Peneda. And we had a chance to visit it in the fall of last year, and just spectacular, and getting back in touch with nature, and very much out, not the commercial centers that you'd see in Lisbon and Porto or Coimbra or some of the other larger towns, or the Algarve for that matter. And then, of course, now moving down a bit, coming a bit further south, is the next area or region is Beirut. And of course, one of the more prominent cities in Beirut is Coimbra. It's a university town. I associate it to being the Harvard of Portugal. Other people might disagree with me, but it is certainly a university town. A lot of medicine and law students, this is where they would go to study. It has a rich history with the university, but also with respect to the religion as well, because those were the two were important as Coimbra evolved. And then, of course, there's the beautiful medieval town of Óbidos. Absolutely a must visit. Any of the tours that we do in continental Portugal include a mandatory visit to Óbidos, unless, of course, it's a private and friends and family group, and they said, no, we've been there, we've done that, we don't want to do it. Fine, but I have yet to find a group that says we don't want to go to Óbidos. Absolutely a must visit as well. Fatima as well, we'll speak to a bit later under the culture, as far as a sanctuary, one of the top sites in Portugal. Over 2 million visitors a year. If you enjoy the Templar Knights history and everything that goes with it, you'll absolutely want to visit Tomar. They have a Templar, it's a former monastery, and it was kind of the head office, if you will, for at least in Portugal, for the Knights Templar. And it's, you can visit and really get a sense that you're stepping back in time as you walk through it. Quite amazing. And of course, invaders as well as what I refer to as the Venice of Portugal. These moliceiros are boats that were used to transport the sea salt back and forth. They look like the gondolas from Venice, and there's a 1 hour excursion that you can do here in Aveiro if you like that. And then, of course, from a beach perspective, Nazaré, there's a ton of beaches in Portugal, all along the coast, not only in the Algarve, all along the western coast of Portugal, a ton of beaches. One of the more famous ones, of course, is Nazaré. They are also known for their very large waves. Some of the largest waves in the world are off the coast of Nazaré. And then, of course, you have other areas in Beira like Batalha, which is the literal translation is battle. And so this was a monument, a monastery erected to thank God for having won the battle and kind of creating a monument to remember that event. And now we get into the Tagus Valley. So Tagus is the English word for Tejo. Tejo is the river that runs through Lisbon and towards or from the inland towards Spain. And so the Tagus Valley is that region around Lisbon. This is Lisbon proper, with St. George Castle in the background on the left. Very cosmopolitan, Portugal's largest city. And of course, the history of Portugal goes back many, many years. But one of the more marking events, a terrible and disastrous earthquake that basically demolished many of the buildings and architecture in Lisbon. But if that wasn't bad enough, it happened on a day where the people were at mass, and so it's during the day. The candles are lit, and with the earthquake, the candles fell, and that triggered a slew of fires. So, in addition to the earthquake and the fires, the earthquake triggered a tsunami as well. So, completely devastated Lisbon. And of course, around Lisbon in the Tagus Valley is Sintra. That is absolutely a must visit, like Óbidos. And in Sintra, there's a couple of highlights, 3 in particular that I've included here. This is the Palacio de Pena. When I first saw this picture, I said, I have to go here. And I did. I've been there, I think, 4 or 5 times, if not more. It's absolutely must visit. But if you do, make sure you plan your trip. And it's got to be kind of the first thing you do in the morning, because otherwise it's overrun with tourism and starting to lose its interest, I think, from an attraction to visit. The other one, though, that is less visited, but also as nice, is actually the Quinta da Higueira, which is where this is more mystic, more history with respect to the Templar Knights and mysticism, and it's a beautiful garden and park. The third piece is the Palacio Nacional, which is in the background there with those large cones. Those large cones are actually ginormous chimneys, and so they could roast full pigs and meat and whatever they were grilling or barbecuing, they could just do it en masse under these huge cones. Walking through it, it's almost like it's been lived in, and so you really get a sense of what it was like to live in that castle back then. A couple of other quick highlights along near the Lisbon is Cascais, beautiful town, kind of a resortish town, as is Estoril, kind of higher end, higher priced real estate, but beaches as well. So you kind of get the beach and the city all in one, right? Whereas in Lisbon, you don't necessarily get as much of a beach as you do here. Although on the southern part of Lisbon, you do, and we'll show you a picture of that. Another popular spot for people that are working remotely is Ericeira. This is also the hotel that you see there in the center of the picture is the Villa Galé. People just love the views from that hotel looking along the coast. You can open the window and hear the waves crashing at night, and it's just kind of a nice, I won't say sleepy, but it's a nice town to just walk around, meander around. They have a coastline that you can walk, and then some pedestrian streets and cafes. Very nice. And then south of the Tejo, the Tagus River, you have Setúbal and the beaches, continuous beaches all the way down along the coast until you get to the Algarve. But before we get to the Algarve, you go through an area called Évora, which has some remnants of, the Romans when they were uh, in power and created, these structures with columns that make us remind us of Rome and Greece. And of course, along the southern coast on our way to the Algarve is the Alentejo region, also quite known and renowned for its wine production. So you will always find Alentejo wines and Douro wines in many of the liquor stores, wine stores that have a deeper selection of wines from Portugal. And then, of course, you get to the Algarve and there's Albufeira, which is kind of the hot spot for people looking for the southern coast in beaches and the coastline. Beautiful walks along these cliffs as well. Different perspective than the Azores, but as beautiful as well. There's an area there near this picture called the Seven Hanging Valleys, and you can walk along the coast. It's just beautiful. And then that covered off. That was a very quick overview. And then we went into politics and kind of from the creation of the Republic to the progress and transition of the different types of government and political leanings, left and right, and swaying in between. Let's just say it's like the weather in the Azores. It changes a lot here. It's very dynamic and variable. And one of those reasons is there's quite a large number of parties, political parties. And so it's hard to get a majority in government because the votes are distributed amongst a greater number of political parties. So it's harder for one party in particular to get a majority of the vote. So what they typically end up having is coalitions. And so some parties come together and create a government, and not uncommon for it to fail or fall and through a non-confidence vote, and then you're back to another election. We also included a video that we didn't go through it in the session, but the link is here for people who are interested to look at a 20-minute video that provides an overview of politics and government, the history and politics in Portugal in 20 minutes. So it's a good overview. And then we spoke and showed some actual video as well of the differences in song and dance in continental Portugal as well as the Azores. So, for example, continental Portugal, you have the fado, which is considered to be the kind of the Portuguese blues and feeling of saudade, I should say, not saúde, saudade, which is a feeling of belonging and sadness. And then the folklore music, very different from the Minho region, for example, and even different regions of Portugal, quite a variety. And then the desgarrada that they have in the continent, the Azorians have a version of it, but they call it a desafio, also a desgarrada, but a little different from the one that's done in continental Portugal. And in Portugal, as I'll flip through and show you some pictures here, this is a video. There's a link here that people can have a look. And this was interesting. It's actually at a restaurant. And while you're having dinner at Patio da Fama in Lisbon, they put on a representation to show off the different regions of Portugal and the different folklore costumes, what they wear, and the different types of dance and the different types of song as well, which is very interesting. In the Azores, Terceira is considered to be the party island, and Carnival for them is one of the top 2 or 3 events during the year where the island just breaks out into one big party. Of course, the other big festas are the Festas de São Joaninas, the St. John festivals in late June, and also as Festas da Praia. So they have these rather large festivals. And of course, in Terceira, they have the running of the bulls. That's hardcore for them, for the people of Terceira and their history and culture that they're very much attached to. And then just to give an example of more regional, local, this is an example of, I would call it square dancing that the locals do to maintain or keep busy during the winter months especially, but they'll often spontaneous combustion. If there's a guitar player, a violin player, and a couple of others, a viola da terra, guitar, they'll break out and someone singing and calling out the steps that they need to do. And it's just an example of some of the local culture. From a religion perspective, Christianity and Catholicism in particular is the largest denomination. We have patron saints celebrated not every day, but every parish, every town has a patron saint. They all have their churches, and each church has a patron saint. And whenever their saint's day of the year kind of comes up, it's celebration, both religious and non-religious festivities as well that go on, and that part of the beauty of what Portugal has as well, as far as the rich culture. We talked about Fatima and the sanctuary. They receive over 2 million visitors. We were fortunate enough to visit it last year on the two main days where the pilgrims congregate in Fatima, and that's typically on May 13th and May 13th and October 13th. And those dates are celebrated because those are dates that mark the apparition of Mary and vision of Mary to three shepherd children. And the apparitions happened on a monthly basis from May 13th to October 13th. And by the time October 13th came around, the sixth and last apparition, there was more than just the three shepherd children who had sightings of the apparitions. And so this is a huge, this picture is actually one that I took when my wife and I were there in May, and it only represents half of the people that are there. So we're about halfway up, and behind us is the other half of that huge square that they have there. And it's quite a moving ceremony that they have there. Similarly, here in São Miguel, just happened a couple of weeks ago, is the pilgrimage to São Miguel for Senhor Santo Cristo, and this is very much celebrated, and people fly and come in to celebrate the Festa de Senhor Santo Cristo here in Ponta Delgada especially. And so if you're looking to come, make sure, and if you're not coming for this pilgrimage, at least be aware of when it is, because availability in flights will be significantly diminished, and as a result, prices are significantly increased. So make sure you plan around that. And more of a local tradition that I really enjoy, we're still in the middle of it now. 7 weeks after Easter is the Pentecost, where you have the Feast of the Holy Spirit. So that was last weekend. And this weekend, we have a Festas da Trindade, the Holy Trinity. And these are festivities, local religious festivities, where the locals come together, not just one community, but on different days, different communities organize different events. And a lot of them, depending on the islands, will provide and offer sopas, which are kind of like, some people call it soggy bread, but they're a very tasty food that could be provided to the masses, because it's just simply bread with a very tasty broth, some meat, some chorizo, sometimes some potatoes or cabbage, depending on the location. And these are things that are done, and sometimes wine and cheese and sweetbread are offered as well, and rice pudding as a dessert. And these are all offered for free throughout the islands, and the communities and on the islands just come together. It's really quite interesting to see. As you see here in this picture, at the very back of this picture, you see a decorated ox cart coming in. I just thought I'd put in a picture of that. That doesn't happen on all of the towns and villages. This is typical of São Jorge, and in particular in Azores, a village where I was born. And they're recognized for decorating their ox carts in all out, as far as flags and ribbons and greenery, etc. And so then we get into some of the actual presentation. So I'll take you through a bit of an overview of some of the material that was covered. So we had Joana Borges, who was a lawyer, who came in and spoke to individuals interested in relocating to Portugal, and spoke about residency and visas. And they provide kind of a one-stop solution for people that are looking for help, whether it's help with acquiring properties, buying or selling them, starting a company and registering them. Even if someone buys the home, isn't here to manage them, they can help make sure that the grass gets cut, and it's visited to make sure things are all okay, that the hydro bill is paid, et cetera, et cetera. So they can help people do that if they need that done. They also, of course, help with relocation, getting the work done, tax issues, government documentation that might be required. They also assist with the immigration. They have powers of attorney, notary services, public services that they provide, and of course, last will and testaments. And oftentimes in Portugal, you need documents translated, and so they can assist with that as well. And so I don't have the time to go through each of the slides, but as part of the full package and presentation, some of the topics that were covered, reporting one's presence after you arrive in the country. She went through the right of residence and kind of what that process was like, and the sequence of events, and then also with respect to how do you get to permanent residency as well. One of the key points that was discussed both in her section and in the accounting section or tax section was the non-habitual resident scheme, is what they referred to it in Portugal, where that gives you significant advantages. And I'll come back to it as well with respect to the advantages, because it's covered in the accounting section or accountant section later on. It's valid for 10 years. And one of the biggest advantages is the fact that your pension income, depending on where you receive it, is only taxed at 10%. Not long ago, it used to be taxed at 0%. So you could receive your pension income here and not pay any tax on it. However, some of the other European communities didn't think that was fair. They was giving Portugal an unfair, undue advantage, and they basically urged them to have a tax. So they've now put in a flat 10%, which compared to tax rates, depending on your level of income, in other countries can still be a significant benefit. And this in itself, some of the tax planning that can be done is of significant value. She also talked about, requesting an exemption to save on a vehicle tax if you're importing a vehicle, the process to go through and getting your driver's license validated in Portugal. And so that was the lawyer section. And then I'm going to give you an overview of the presentation that was done on Fayal Island. We won't do the other islands in particular because they all kind of follow a similar format, so you'll get a feel for what the information that was covered. On Fayal, we asked Laurentius Metalis to do the presentation, to lead this section. And he is a Dutch by origin. He's originally from Holland, worked in China as well, and has been in Fayal, in Norte specifically, for quite a few years. And so he's a licensed real estate mediator. He can act for the buyer and for the seller. The beauty, though, he's beyond that. He's beyond real estate broker / agent. He also has a business that can actually take a ruin and then help do the renovations, or actually take a plot of land and build a new home from scratch. So it's kind of vertically integrated. And so that allows him to have a really good sense. And he provided really good insights into the things that you need to look for when you're buying a home or residence. And, home inspections aren't that common here, depending on the buyer. The buyer might want a home inspection, so he does do that. There are not many home inspectors out there, but he can provide some tips and tricks on that. And, construction, renovations, importing cargo, we spoke about that. And we asked each of the speakers to provide an overview from their perspective as to the pros and cons for their respective islands. And so here, I won't go through these points. I don't have the time to go through them, but you see them here on the slide as far as the pros and cons for Fayal, as an example. And then we asked them to speak to 3 specific areas. What are some of the things that people should know about when they're talking about, buying something that's ready to move in? So buy-in ready or move-in ready. And so, of course, there's no licensing issues because it's done, it's up. There's less stress. You get what you see. You don't have to visual, it's there. That's what you're buying. You're getting it. And then he also provides some metrics as far as cost per square meter. He also provided some insights on old ruins. So if you're buying an old ruin, some of the advantages. We had one individual in the workshop who was interested in this type of project because he wanted something that he could, maybe it's not a complete ruin, but something that needed some more love and care, some fixer-upper maybe. And he wanted to come in, move in, and do some of the work himself. So there's some advantages for doing that as well. And of course, you can use it as a rental, or perhaps a portion of it can be used as a rental. And he provided some benchmark costs as well. And then as well, we asked each of the real estate experts to provide an overview and provide insights into examples of properties and what they cost and where they are, And he went through and provided some examples of things that were basically a ruin, and went through and spoke to, the process to get them revitalized, redone. And as part of the excursion in the afternoon, the field trip, if you will, people went out and we visited some of these properties as well, kind of the finished product. So you can saw the pictures of where it was and where it ended up. Then he also spoke to buying new and the advantages of, starting with a blank piece of paper. You're able to design your home the way you want to, and have it set up the way you want, with the comfort and the heating systems and ventilation and cooling and humidification or dehumidification system, so you don't, because humidity here on the islands is an issue that you need to be aware of. They were spread throughout the island. When we did a full turn around the island, so we went all the way around. The properties were focused in certain areas, and for example, we stopped in Veraduro because Veraduro is an area that some people actually really liked, although we didn't visit any homes there. But there were some available, and it's kind of a microclimate zone, very quiet, a lot of green space, and so people resonated with that. And so, if you want to see more kind of behind the scenes, especially in part one, we actually see more of the sites that we saw um, as part of the field trips or excursions. So this is the thumbnail of what the Carlos and Laura's episode was this week, which was the behind the scenes of this workshop, the Azores Portugal Workshop. So have a look at that and watch for the next one as well. And I think you'll get a sense that although people came and arrived as participants, they left as friends. And I think that was an interesting bond that kind of evolved over the course of the 10 days. And so some of the examples of the listings that we visited, and you'll see in the video, there was a bed and breakfast that someone is looking to sell, higher end property, super well built. It's a German owner. He's now looking to move on and to another project, and this one's now available with very high construction, high quality construction. It's another example. This is included in the video. This is as well, and what I don't have here in the pictures that you'll only see in the video is some of the value that you see is not just the home. According to Laurentius, it's got good bones, it's got good infrastructure, but it's everything behind it as well, the garden. And as you'll see in the video, people took a liking to the outhouse that was there, because there's some green space and plants growing around it, so people got a kick out of seeing that in the background as well. But they're quite an interesting property that we visited, and this was another one as well, and one with a larger piece of land with some work. And then the interesting thing was he also provided some words of wisdom. And so simple examples of things, suggestions that he would make to friends and family if they were looking to move. So he's providing that type of insight to the attendees, and goes through in quite a lot of detail that I could not do it justice in trying to speak to each of these points. But you can see, so some of the practical examples of things that I kind of got a kick of him including here, for example, is leave your electrical appliances at home if you're coming from Canada and the US, for example, where the voltage is 110. You're only going to end up buying a new one because it's going to burn out, and you've got extra costs with respect to transportation. And in real estate, location, location, location. Well, he pointed out, if you're going to make a move like this to Portugal, the number one thing is learn the language, learn the language, learn the language. And that came up from a lot of the expats as well when they were speaking to people. And of course, we were talking to people about Azorean time, and it's a different pace of life. It takes longer to get things done, and so patience, patience, and then breathe in, and then repeat. Basically, he's kind of says you just have to have a lot of patience here. So I think those are great practical advice to make sure people are aware and ready when they come and decide to come to the Azores. The other speakers that we had from a real estate perspective, Keller Williams agent was Magda Leal. She spoke to Pico Island, but what she also brought to the table was the fact that she lives in continental Portugal in Lisbon, and kind of can provide that added value as well. So that was interesting, and provided a lot more statistics and data, that I must say, than some of the other presenters, kind of to really give people an overview. as far as immigration to Portugal as well. And on Portugal, on St. George Island, on the Dragon Island, we had a representative from Remax, Luis Fernandes, who spoke to St. George and did a presentation and then took us around the island and showed us some properties there, which I must say, I think people were quite impressed and enjoyed the island. I think perhaps it might have been a surprise. They weren't expecting that, but it was nice to see and observe some of the discussion. One of the last things I'm going to touch on is kind of probably the most important section, or I think it seemed from observing the discussion that the participants had with this speaker. This is probably the one that, if you came to the workshop, this is probably the one that where you recouped your costs, and maybe then some 2 or 3 times over, perhaps, because of what you'd be able to save just doing the right tax planning and knowing what to do and make sure you do it in the right steps and in the right order. I think the presentation was about an hour, but I think there was another 45 minutes to an hour of questions and answers that continue on with Ricardo. Ricardo is from the Algarve. He participated virtually. Didn't make a lot of sense to fly him in for 2 hours and fly back. So, in the post-COVID world, virtual participation is generally accepted, and I think it worked extremely well. His group has grown to just under 40 people, and so his team, that's what they do. They help people that are moving to Portugal, and they help them through the system. Excellent handle on English, and have seen probably just about every situation you can imagine, whether it's people coming from the UK, EU, Canada, Europe, and other parts of the world. They've probably had an example of it already. And so it provided an overview of their services and where they provide help, provided an overview of this non-habitual resident roadmap, the tax scheme, which can provide a significant tax savings and advantage. And so he walked us through the process from, getting your fiscal number, applying for residency, getting your tax status set up, filing the application, and then actually getting your residency certificate so you could benefit from it. And on the next couple of slides, I've simply captured the questions that he answered as part of the presentation. So, for example, he explains the non-habitual resident tax regime, who can apply, are you required to own property in order to apply? Quick peek at the answers. No, you don't. And is there a minimum time that you're required to stay in Portugal? Is also something he addressed. How do I submit the application? What are the time frames, deadlines? Is foreign sourced income exempt under that status? How do you become an HR tax resident? And what are the tax obligations, and blah, blah. It went through and covered all of these questions as part of it. We also had a presentation from a banker and from Santander, one of the largest banks. Presentation is applicable to many of the banks, so the information that he presented would be the same for all of the banks, or very similar at least. And so he listed off the information that individuals would be required to have if they were opening up a bank account. Also went through the presentation of the information that you would need to do in the process to get a loan or mortgage. And I should mention as well, Laura and Carlos in their presentation, I didn't cover materials from their presentation because it deals with their journey on Pico Island and the purchase of the home, and so you'll see that in their videos as well. But they also in their presentation go through the whole process of what they went through in getting a mortgage as well. So very similar to some of the information that we see here as well. And then the person from the bank also spoke to insurance, because here the banks also sell insurance. So health insurance, life insurance, homes, cars, and accidents as well. And then just one of the last slides here, I think one of the values, maybe intangible in a sense, we had expats participate both at dinners and lunches, numerous couples, where they would share what their life has been, what their experience is. So it's not just the Carlos and Laura experience that you see on their channel, but you actually get people that have packed up the garage, put it into a container, and in some cases brought a car over and set up here and bought a house, and are integrated into the healthcare system. And so you really got a feel for what that process was like. And a lot of questions were asked, a lot of questions were answered. I won't go into Wayne went above and beyond the call of duty here. He actually was a formal presenter, put a very detailed and complete presentation together. And here's kind of his topics that were discussed. Of course, there's a bit of background on him. He spoke to facets of Azorean life, the home life, the commercial life, the elements of local culture and government entities, and transitioning to the Azores. And he also had an excellent section on kind of just some practical things you need to know about if you're planning to move to the Azores. And that kind of summarizes where we are. And I encourage you to watch the video part 1 and part 2 that's going to be coming up soon as well. If you're interested in the digital version, which will be a much more complete package, as I said, with the videos of all of the presenters, not me summarizing it, the actual presenters going through all of their materials, digital PDFs of their slides. The slides will be available. Any other material that they provided will also be included in the package, so not included as part of the presentation, but a couple of them provided some extra materials or references, so we'll include those as well. And we'll also look to put together some videos as kind of some of the excursions or activities that we did, and including some of these videos that you see here. So if you're interested, please drop us a note at Egidio at Life Wellness Azores, or as well Carlos and Laura through their channel, Our Journey on Pico Island, as well as Carlos and Laura's website, Pico Holiday Experts. And so do let us know. And as soon as we have details on the cost and how they're going to be made available, we will be sending that out to the people on our list of people that are interested. So do get your names in there if you are interested. I hope you enjoyed this overview. And one last thing, we'll see you in the Azores.